You break it, you buy it. That's the rule at the Pottery Barn. But will that be the rule at the United States Supreme Court this term? IJ is going to find out. I'm joined by my colleague Bob McNamara and our client Richie DeVilliers to talk about this case that we're taking up this winter. Okay, Richie, tell me how this got started. Tell me about your family's history.
So my great-grandfather moved from Louisiana to Beaumont and then to Winnie, ended up in Winnie, and bought property in the early 1900s, raised his family there. His sons did the same, started buying and farming and ranching on land around Winnie, Texas, the same land that where we live and farm now and raise cattle. The interstate system was not there initially when my ancestors bought the property and developed their ranches. Since TxDOT improved the highway system in 2000, they changed the drainage underneath and they built the interstate up higher and put a dam in the middle of it, a concrete barrier for safety reasons, but it acts exactly like a dam because there are no openings, no drainage. It's grouted in and it's impervious to water.
So tell me about the first hurricane that came through after they put the highway dam up.
So Harvey was our first event that flooded us. It came in 17. My parents live a half a mile from the house that we live in now that was flooded. My parents are actually right up on the interstate. Water started coming in their house the day before it started coming in our house. So we picked my parents up, brought them to our house overnight. We thought they would be safe. We didn't think we would flood. We'd never seen any flooding like that before. But overnight, the water started coming in our home, and by morning, it was knee deep in our house.
Man, and that was the first flood,
That
right?
was Harvey in 2017. Yes. And
then what happened the second time?
2 years later, what TxDOT said, that's a 500 or 1,000 year storm. It'll never happen again. We don't have to worry about this. 2 years later, same thing, exact same thing. We had 23 inches of water in our house after Harvey, during the Harvey event, because that equates to the top of the concrete barrier on the interstate that is a quarter of a mile from my house. Imelda, same 23 inches in our house. Every time it rains and impounds water until this is resolved is going to equate to 23 inches of water in our home.
Man. So, Bob, if they had put the highway on his land, it would have been eminent domain, and the state would have had to pay him for the land, right?
Exactly. So if the state wants to build a highway across your land, they have to buy it. If the state wants to build a dam across your land, they have to buy it. It's perfectly possible that Texas needs Richie's land to be a lake sometimes. He complained, and a Texas engineer told him, well, if we don't have this dam, we won't be able to get ambulances across the road when there's an emergency. Fair enough. That sounds like something the public might need, but if the public needs your land, the public is supposed to buy your land.
So tell me a little bit about the legacy of your family and what it has meant in terms of the flood.
Well, like I said, I'm fourth generation to farm and ranch on this general area in Winnie. My father grew up on the place, actually grew up on the homestead where we live now, where my wife and I live now. He was physically born on this property in a house on this land and worked all his life, married, raised his family there, and was displaced by this flood in Harvey. And we were lucky enough to have my sister had a place for him to stay in Oregon. So he and my mother moved up there, and in February of the next year, he passed away. So he was flooded out of the home that he grew up on, raised his family on, worked all his life, and never came back to.
So the last sight he had of his land was
wading
flooded?
Through his house, wading knee deep through his house. And he and my mother just looked shell-shocked. I mean, as they were completely deflated. It was a terrible thing for them to have to go through at that stage in their life, both of them in their 80s. and to see their home and their farm and their animals, their horses, going through this just was devastating to them. And that's the kind of thing that you can't be compensated for. You just that robbed them. My mother passed away last year in Oregon also. Robbed them of the quality of life of their last few months. And that's egregious to me on a level that I can't describe.
Beyond your homes, your animals and your crops were also destroyed, right?
We lost dozens of cattle, several horses, a colt. Yes, that obviously that's how we make our living. But that was a surreal thing to go through. Also, my son and I, after the first flood in Harvey, got in a boat and we were going around surveying the property, trying to figure out how best to save any of the animals that were still standing in flooded, chest deep or more in flooded water. And we opened gates to try to get them to higher ground, but the gates were underwater. I mean, the cattle couldn't tell where they were, but it was almost like they were shell shocked also. They'd been standing in deep water for a couple of days, and when that happens, their hair starts to slough off their hide, and their skin will just start sagging and dropping, but they have no energy. And we couldn't drive them, we couldn't push them, we couldn't pull them in a boat. So they just wasted away, and that was a terrible thing to witness.
So after the second hurricane, you decided you needed to file a lawsuit, right?
Yes, we knew we had to do something. There was just no other option. So we were very blessed to find Burn Charest law firm that were willing to take our case. We pled our case to them, showed them the pictures, explained what happened, and they agreed that we had been wronged and that they could help us. So we were totally blessed in finding them.
So, Bob, what happened with the case in the courts?
So Richie and his family did what you're supposed to do. They filed what's called a takings claim. The Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution says if the government's going to take private property for public use, it owes just compensation. And the way you get that, if the government doesn't on the front end say we're buying your land, is you file a lawsuit that says, hey, you effectively took my land. The Fifth Amendment says you have to pay me. But then Texas removed that case from the state courts into the federal courts because the Fifth Amendment is a federal law. You get to be in federal court, and persuaded the federal courts to say that actually, even though the Fifth Amendment says the government is supposed to pay you, the government only has to pay you if Congress passes a statute ordering them to. And so that means that Richie and all of his neighbors are just out of luck because there's no statute that says Texas has to obey the Fifth Amendment. And what the court said is if no statute says Texas has to follow the Constitution, Texas doesn't have to follow the Constitution.
So, Bob, the courts have a disagreement about how this is all supposed to work out. And when you saw this case, what went through your mind?
So another lawyer at IJ emailed me the decision in Richie's case and sort of said, I'm not a takings expert, but this seems weird. And I responded, I am a takings expert, and this is weird. But the courts have been struggling for a long time with what it means when the Fifth Amendment orders the government to pay just compensation. Is that actually a command that the government's supposed to follow that you can enforce in court? Or is that just sort of wishful thinking? It would be a nice thing if. We hope the legislature follows through on this. And it was a very short opinion. Richie's case was thrown out in a single paragraph with no real analysis, and it just perfectly teed up this issue that property owners across the country had been struggling with about whether there's a way to actually hold the government accountable when it decides it doesn't feel like following its obligations under the Fifth Amendment.
So, Richie, we got news that the Supreme Court was taking your case actually on the same day that Bob and I and a bunch of our other clients and our donors were at a conference together. And I remember pulling in and shaking your hand and you texting me saying, can I give people hugs? And I said, you can give people hugs. But tell me how that felt.
It was a huggy kind of day, yes. So my wife and I flew in the evening before, and I got a text at 6 o'clock that morning. We were still in bed, and it was from our Texas attorneys saying, congratulations, gents. We're going to the Supreme Court. They've accepted your petition. And I hollered so loud it almost rolled her out of bed. But just the ability to show up and meet these people, the donors, at this function that morning, that it was almost like it was divine timing. It was so awesome to be able to express to them our gratitude, because if not for them, there's no way we would be where we are. We would not have this opportunity to correct this wrong, and get things solved for everyone going forward.
Bob, what was it like when you heard the news?
As Richie says, it was a huggy kind of day. It's very exciting, and it's why you do this kind of work, right? It's frustrating to look out at a world that is full of injustices, that is full of things happening to people who don't deserve them, and it's tremendously gratifying to do the kind of work where your job is to correct those. And when you find the right moment and when it actually works, it's a tremendously rewarding feeling.
So, Bob, you're getting ready to go to the Supreme Court. Tell me, what do you think is going to be sort of the central issue?
Really, the central issue in this case is whether the Constitution means what it says and whether the courts get to be in the business of enforcing what it says. There are a lot of people, especially in modern America, who really say that all that should matter is the legislature, that if the government wrongs you, you should go to Congress, you should go to the state legislature, hat in hand, and you should ask them to do what's right. But the reason we have a Constitution in the first place is that the government often doesn't want to do what's right. They don't want to pay what you're owed, and we adopted a Constitution so that it's not a request for justice. The Constitution is a command for justice. And the question really is whether the courts are going to be in the business of enforcing that command.
So, Richie, what do you want out of this case?
We want to be righted. We want to be compensated what they took from us. But most of all, we want this issue solved for our family, for our area, but everyone in the country should be interested in what's happening in this case, because if it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone that thinks they own property and is protected by the Constitution. If the state of Texas is upheld in what they claim they believe, then everyone is at risk. Where are our rights going from here?
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here, and I can't wait to see what happens this winter.
Thanks a lot.
We can't either. Thank you very much.